Well, hey, y'all. Welcome to the When We Walk podcast. This is a podcast where we discuss the questions we all ask as we walk through life. I'm Shireen.
I'm Micah.
Let's chat.
Okay, so I don't know if we've talked about this before on this podcast, but let me just hit you with this question. What is the first big fight you remember us having?
Ooh.
As a couple?
In married or?
Just in life.
There were so many.
Yeah.
Which one do I go with? Huh?
What just comes to your mind as soon as I say one of our earliest fights? Don't think too much about all the rules. Just turn your one off.
Okay.
And just what comes to your mind?
One of the first ones I remember is we got in a fight on our honeymoon.
Yes.
In the car.
Uh-huh. I remember that one. That was one of the first ones I thought of.
We were driving, we were in Barbados.
Yep.
We were rented a cute little car, but we had to drive on the other side of the road.
Yes.
So was the steering wheel on the other side too?
Yep.
And
the whole thing was backwards.
First of all, marriage and driving. Yeah. It's a whole thing.
It is.
It's a whole
Little did we know.
We did not realize. And I tend to be kind of a back seat side driver, commentator driver. And I maybe got a little bit critical, aggressive with you.
I don't even remember
driving?
how it all transpired. I just remember
I was terrified for our lives, for sure.
And I was like,
and you got angry,
feeling the pressure and irritated.
And you got irritated.
So I overreacted.
Yes. And then we got in a huge fight.
Yep.
And we were trying to drive somewhere to go
just visit the island.
Yeah. And I think
the
rest of the ride was completely silent.
Yeah, it probably was.
And I was in tears.
Yeah.
As usual.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. That was actually one of the first I thought of. I think the first I thought of, engaged, you were my intern.
No, we weren't engaged. I think we were married.
We were married.
We were married.
Yeah. So that
when
was
you
right
asked me to preach and I told you no.
Yeah.
And we got a huge fight about it.
Yeah, that was a big fight.
Yeah.
And you did it and it was great. And now you're
was it though?
A preacher.
So now you pride yourself in that, don't you?
Exactly. Every time you get up there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm glad I won that fight.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
So here's why I bring that up, because conflict is a part of life.
Yeah, it is.
Right. And we're all going to experience it on every level. Single, married, friends, family, coworkers, anybody, driving down the road, all kinds of things. And I think conflict resolution is a lost art.
Yeah.
I think we don't know how to do it in our culture. And more than a lost art, I don't think it's actually really even a value in our world today. I think we more value standing your ground than we do coming to terms with somebody or finding a compromise or getting to a place of kind of peace and reconciliation. I think we really do value just standing your ground. I think
that, but then also I think about premaritals with couples, you talk a lot about communication, right? How to communicate. And I think the idea is if I communicate really well, I won't have a conflict. Mm-hmm. And so then we don't get to the other side of, well, what do you do when you do have a conflict? How do you fight well?
Yeah.
I know we've had those conversations with couples, but I don't know that everyone talks about that. It's do really good at communicating really clearly on the front end so that you don't have a fight. Because if you get to the fight, then good luck.
Yeah, that's so true.
And so I think there's a lot of factors that feed this idea of conflict is where you don't want to be. It's bad. It's wrong. But so then we don't talk about how to actually deal with it.
Yep, that's very true. Yeah. Even that, I was like you saying that, you talk about with premarital, we do talk about communication so much. What about people who aren't going through premarital? Are they getting coached intentionally around how to do things?
Because
friends,
it happens in friendship. It happens at work.
Yep.
It happens with your children. It happens in literally anytime you have a human-to-human relationship. Mm-hmm. You are guaranteed there. I mean, you said it, I think, in one sermon one time, that is something that will come at some point.
It will, always. And like I said, we just don't value it. I think we actually feel like if you give ground, that you're a sellout.
Yeah.
You're being oppressed on some level.
You're weak.
You're having
You're
to, be inauthentic and not be your real self. There's a lot of kind of thinking around that kind of stuff. So
because we're known for what we stand for.
Yes, we are. I read this recently, this little tweet, where this little thread where a lady posted, "I'm so fascinated by people who don't drink coffee. What is your morning vice to get you through the day?" And this guy responds,
Tea for me.
Yes, it is. This guy responds, "Hatred." And honestly, I think that's honestly, so many people do. Like, they wake up in the morning, they open their phones up, and they just get fired up about something. And that's what
it
gets
drives
them out of bed in the morning. And I think it's become so normalized that we just don't even think about it. Like, how much time, energy, much of our thought processes as we go throughout our day are actually fueled by irritation, frustration, kind of creating arguments against people or trying to build arguments about what we believe and why we believe it. Or
oh my God. No wonder there's so many angry drivers.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
They wake up and get mad first before they get in the car.
Yeah, I think there are people that do. I think both interpersonally, I think conflict is just going to be a part of life because we're human beings. But I also think we're currently living in a cultural moment where the powers that be, and whether you say that's politicians or influencers or the enemy, like the powers that be are leveraging fear, anger, divisiveness towards particular ends. And so we're living in this space right now.
Because it feels like, even what that guy said, that he knows that if I get angry, if I'm motivated by hate, it will move me. And I think that's become almost like a value. And like you said, people are leveraging that because they know there will be a movement towards something if they hate another thing. And usually the other thing becomes person or people group or something.
It does. Yep.
That is really sad and scary.
Yeah, it is. It'll not lead us anywhere good. And I think as Christians, we should be leading the way with an opposite spirit.
Of course.
I think, yes, we are people of conviction, but I also think when you read, especially through the New Testament, you have very clear teaching that we're actually called to be peacemakers, that we're actually, I was reading Romans 12:8, that as much as it is up to you, live at peace with all men. Make every effort to live at peace with everybody as much as you can.
Good. That's whatever you can control of the situation.
And so to me, that is telling us as we are called as Christians to lead the way in living at peace with others. And I think even in the church, we've kind of lost this. It's hard because we feel like we need to stand our ground on certain convictions, but at the same time, we're called to be peacemakers. We know that.
So then, can you stand your ground? Is that even a thing? I don't know if I like that phrase. Is that a thing? Should we even say that?
Yeah.
Because that automatically feels like a divider, feels like I'm angry because I'm standing here. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe it needs to be redeemed. But can you do that? Can you have, I like that better. Can you have strong convictions and not let it lead you to a divisive kind of hate-filled debate of things?
Yeah.
I feel like people can't do that anymore.
Yeah, I don't know if they can. That's an interesting point. Standing your ground, is that really even a thing? So biblically, thinking of the passages that have to do with like standing, stand in your faith.
Yes.
Stand strong to the end, steadfast. Those really have to do with standing on Jesus or with Jesus. And yes, he was a man of conviction, but he was also a man of compassion.
Yes, both.
And so you have to do, if you're going to stand with Jesus, I can't think of a passage that tells me to stand strong on a particular doctrinal stance. It usually is standing strong in your faith.
Oh, that's really
good.
And your
faith in what and who? In Jesus and the totality of who he is, which is both conviction and compassion.
Yes.
And so the best place to go is just to go to him. I mean, over and over again, just going back to the Gospels, looking at how did Jesus do it in a culture that was just as divided, in a culture that was just as warped and perverted and confused as ours is today. How did Jesus go about things? I
think we forget that sometimes because as Christians, we read the Gospels. I know I read it all last year, every month, read through all 4 Gospels. And obviously the picture of Jesus is what stands out to us as Christians. But I think we forget what was happening on the other side, if you say it that way, of like what was happening culturally was so messy and ugly and filled with sin and hatred, all of it.
It was.
And I think we forget that he walked in such compassion in that place that's what was revolutionary too. And so I think you're right. Like we have to watch how he did it, but we forget that the nature of what was happening in that time.
Yeah. It was a pretty hostile environment.
Okay. So what do we do?
Yeah. I mean, I think Scripture gives us a lot of insights on how to be peacemakers and how to live well in the midst of any kind of a culture, any kind of a place. I often go back to James 1, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. I remember 2020 is when this passage like really kind of just came to the surface of my operating with all that was happening, the politics, the protests, the pandemics, all the opinions that everyone had, all the divisiveness. And it really, to me, that was the passage that I kept coming. There was actually 2, but that was one of the ones that kept coming back to my mind. Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry.
That is not a value anymore.
No.
Because everyone wants everyone to have an opinion, and you need to have it right away because you have to state it.
Yeah.
You have to put it out there to the world via social media or whatever platform you have. And that's what people are saying. Like, state your stance publicly on your platform. Use your platform wisely. And I mean, God's telling us to do completely the opposite. Listen first. Take your time. Be slow to speak. And that is not a value.
Yeah.
And so I think that does, because we're so quick to stand, I think it does lead to more anger. We're so quick to like take up that stance and like be ready to defend it before we even really understand.
Yep. Yeah. I think that's huge. I think a way to be a better listener is not just to be quiet.
Right.
Sometimes it's to ask good questions. Like,
no, that's good.
We don't always do that. And so whether it's with people that we're having interpersonal conflict with, kind of the help me understand is the verse.
I love that phrase. Everyone needs to use that phrase.
Just learn how to say that.
Help me understand
why you said this.
We've taught our kids this even.
Help me understand. It's a very non-combative way to gather more information and hopefully cultivate some empathy if it's not already there, to help me understand why you did this. Help me understand why you said this. Help me understand. So doing that both interpersonally, but also on a larger scale, as we enter into political world this year, and
I think
all kinds
everyone's
of things.
feeling PTSD about that.
Yeah, and there's protests happening right now on college campuses around Palestine and Israel. Like so much. Like, help me understand. Like, take some time to at least consider the perspective that you don't currently hold.
That's really
just
good.
Take some time to do it. If you're opposed to doing that to me, I would say, help me understand why you can't just read an article from a source that you don't typically get news from. Or,
well, as a believer, that shows maybe where your heart posture is, and that you're not. You do need to back up and say, wait a second, am I taking a stand and I'm not allowing compassion to lead me right now? And to understand, part of understanding is compassion led.
Yeah. So to me, that's the first step, is quick to listen, ask good questions, help me understand.
That's good.
Broaden your sources when it comes to media or information, but also when it comes to interpersonal, like take some time to hear the whole story. And then Be quick to listen, slow to speak. I think this is huge in our day. We feel, like you said earlier, like
it is not a value
we
anymore.
all have to, say something as soon as something happens. We have to have a statement on it. I do think that expectation has cooled a little bit in our culture.
I think because we've seen people make quick assumptions and then realize, oh, I was wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't want to look dumb and be wrong.
And we're also learning that like what you say on social media is not the totality of who you are. No. I remember a few years ago, a guy saying, man, he told me, he said, if I'm going to follow somebody, I look back at what they said about this issue to determine if I can respect them or not. That's how narrow-minded he was going about his followership.
Oh, that's scary.
And on social media. And I thought, like, wow, that's not fair, because what if they just didn't post about that issue? What if they were on a social media fast during that issue? What if they just were busy that day and they didn't have a second
or evolved their thinking and read more and learned more,
and their perspective changed?
Yes, and they didn't share about it again.
And so I do think that has cooled a little bit, at least in the worlds that I live in. I don't think it's so much like your social media, bio is the totality of who you are.
Yeah.
But I still think there is that expectation, especially with important things. You need to speak, and you need to speak quickly, which is so counter to the way of Jesus.
Yes, it so is.
It's so counter, because what being slow to speak does is it creates space between your words for your heart to be moved, for the Lord to speak. I mean, I just think we need more time in our lives to hear what he has to say about something before we come to our own conclusions.
He is not fast. We know that.
Yeah.
God does not always move fast.
Yeah, he does not.
And so if we move faster than him, we're going to miss something.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be that far out ahead. I don't think any of us as believers should be. So I think you're right. We do need to be slower. I think one of the things that also we can be reactive. And so we've trained ourselves to be. So we see something, stirs anger, or might not even be anger, but just frustration or a thought. And we feel like we have to make a rebuttal right away. I see something on social media, I'm going to respond to that. And that's what people are doing. It is rampant, right? All the comments. Sometimes I'll go to a post and be like, oh, I can't wait to read the comments on this one, because that's what people do. And it's just drama and kind of comical. But you see what is the initial that comes out of people's hearts and then words and minds. And it's sad because that shows you what is right there on the surface. Instead of, wait a second, the things that are right there on the surface might not always be the best indicator of how I need to respond or what's happening in my heart and life right now. I need to give it a minute. I need to be slow to speak. I need to sit with the Lord, and I need to figure out why this triggered me, why this made me upset, and then maybe do some personal digging and then see where a response needs to come. We don't do that. Nobody does that.
No, not at all. So creating that space is really important. And for some people, depending on if you know yourself well, you might even be able to create some like parameters for yourself to say, actually, I won't comment on the latest whatever that everyone has thoughts on for 48 hours. And I'm going to actually make myself have a 48-hour window where I ask good questions and where I listen to what God has to say.
Or read other people that I might not agree with first and see what they're saying. And then, do some digging, and then some personal digging, and then sit with the Lord, because that's important. Yeah.
So slow to speak, and then slow to become angry. And again, I think I understand how anger has kind of risen as a cultural value in our world. And I get it. Like, I'm not totally, I mean, I can empathize with how this has happened when a very oppressed people have risen up to say, we're tired of being walked on. Like, and this is, it's okay for us to be angry. It's okay. This is coming from a place of hurt and pain and rejection. And I get that. But then anger can become so elevated that it actually, you feel like you're doing something wrong if you're not mad about something.
That is so true.
If you are mad about something, then you have every right to be mad, and you need to tell the whole world. And that to me is just it's not a healthy way. I mean, Scripture again is clear that a man's anger does not bring about the righteousness that God desires.
Oh, that's good.
And so we need to understand that, yes, there are times when anger, is an emotion that we need to listen to and ask the question, why am I angry? And do some digging, some soul searching into that, which can be a really good thing. But to react out of our anger, to speak out of our anger, I think it very rarely produces the kind of fruit that Jesus is into.
No, it doesn't. I think, so we're talking about this on this grand scale, right? Like social media or kind of big people groups and big topics. But then I think all of these principles can be applied and should be applied and practiced one-on-one.
Totally, yeah.
I think that is actually how you learn that better than doing it on social media.
Anger is a perfect example. Like, it's easy to get angry to the universe.
Right.
Because you don't know the damage that it's causing. So I'll say what I want to say, but just use it when I get angry at a kid, when I get angry at a friend or a neighbor or a spouse, or coworker, it does damage. And that needs to be this reminder that, like, just because you're doing it on social media to the whole world doesn't mean it's not doing the same, having the same kind of
and same effects in your heart.
Right. Yeah.
And Jesus is so clear about loving our neighbor, and our neighbor is digital now, and our neighbor is in real life as well. And so we can't think that what we're cultivating in our hearts when we react digitally in the world is not going to produce the same fruit in our real life lives as well. Like, we're cultivating something that will keep going in your real life world, like with people you actually work with. You're going to start becoming easily angered at your boss for a decision they made, even if it was the wrong decision. Or you're going to start getting angry at your neighbor because, their cat comes in your yard or whatever. Like, it will cultivate things in our hearts. And I think, obviously God's so smart. He knew that would be something we would struggle with. And we have to, like you said, put up boundaries. But I think the same way we practice, in the digital space, we need to practice in our life on life people. And if we can do those well, because I know we say it all the time, like, it's easy to hide behind a screen and say those things. Would you say those in real life? And I'd say, I think a lot of those people now have cultivated those feelings and probably do react like that in their real life. And it's creating so many fractured relationships. We don't know how to do friendship well. We don't know how to do good working relationships well. We don't know how to, when, a coworker does something, instead of, immediately thinking, oh, they did that to sabotage me or this project or whatever, instead of going to them and say, hey, help me understand why you made that decision. And it could just be, oh my gosh, I missed something. Thank you for helping me see that. We jump to conclusions.
We really do. Yeah. So, you think about the teaching of Jesus that is flies in the face of so much of how the direction our world is moving, which is not just to tolerate our enemies, and even more than just live at peace with others, but it's to love our enemies.
Yeah.
That's
hard when you really think about it.
That's the thing. Yeah. That's like, that's grad level love right there.
It is.
That's deep stuff. It's mature stuff to be able to love our enemies, to love those. And you could say it this way in the context of this conversation: love those we disagree with, love those we don't vote like,
love those who have hurt us,
who are on the different side of an issue than us, love those who have hurt us. That's a high calling.
Yeah.
And it does not ignore trauma, and it does not ignore the need for boundaries at times. It does not ignore
your personal pain,
real harm and pain that you've experienced at the hands of others. And yet the invitation remains, love your enemies. And I think if we as followers of Jesus could lead the way in this area, to be people who live at peace as far as it's up to us,
right?
To make every effort to live at peace with those around us. We might not get as many clicks or views.
No,
we might not, it might not be as interesting, and there wouldn't be as much drama in our lives. But on a relational level, I think we would have richer and deeper relationships that have, some of our deepest relationships in life are those that we've gone through some conflict with, right?
That is so true.
Yeah.
If you can get to the other side of conflict well in a relationship, any relationship, marriage, with your kids, friendship, neighbors, coworker, the relationship, the fruit on the other side, it's always deeper. Your roots go deeper. The fruit that you produce, I think, is so much more beautiful and enjoyable to the rest of the world around you. Those are the stories we love.
Yep.
We love the redemption stories, but we don't realize the work it takes to get to that. And it is hard, personal work, but then relational understanding, compassion. I think that is a hard thing for us to realize.
It is.
And to walk through.
Yeah. So interpersonally, I think it makes our relationships richer and deeper. But then even like when it comes to social media and our social influence that we carry, like if we become a person who's quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, and we say, I'm going to use any platform that I have, regardless of how big or small it may be, to actually release things into the world that are, according to Philippians 4, like good, true, right, noble, excellent, praiseworthy. Like, think about ways that you can celebrate others. Think about ways that you can highlight beauty. Think about ways that you can promote compassion and good and kindness, instead of feeling the need to make a statement about everything. And at times when a statement needs to be made, how can it be made, depending on the space that you make it, in a way that's compassionate and kind and gracious?
I think I always think about the fact, like, I want to be known more for my compassion and love than I do for what I stand for or against. I think what follows, all the convictions you have, if they follow behind compassion and love, people are way more willing to communicate with you about them. If they're led first with compassion and love instead of, and I think that's how Jesus did it. That's why people were intrigued by the very convicting conversations and stances he took, because it was always led with compassion and love.
That's so true. It's good. So as we traverse through this year and in a world that loves conflict and division, let's try to be peacemakers. So my thought for anyone listening to us would be, did anyone come to mind that you were thinking of as we were talking through this? Good. Are there any, any relationships currently that you're existing in right now that where there's some conflict, and how could you maybe apply some of this stuff to
I think that's good.
Change the direction. Okay.
All right.
Awesome. Great conversation.
Yep.
Thanks for being with us, and we can't wait to be with you next time.